Welcome everyone. We waited a few minutes for people to join. There are far more people who signed up than who are here, so some people might join us on the way. I would like to thank you for coming, and please confirm that you see my slides and you hear me well. Okay, thanks. Thanks. I see people nodding and giving the thumbs up. Okay. So this is one webinar or seminar in the Respond webinar series, outward facing public webinars. These are recorded, so please let us know if you do not wish to be on this recording. In terms of structure, we have 1.5 hours in total, which I know is a lot. So I will see if people start to disappear after some time. But let's plan for this 1.5 hours to spend together. I plan to talk no more than 45 minutes in chunks. So I will stop at certain parts for questions, and please feel free to raise your hand. I think it's possible. Or write in the chat posing your questions. Now, what I brought today is a little bit of overview of where I think we are in terms of measuring corruption, approximating corruption in public procurement. And I brought 3 different papers which are loosely related to each other. But in each of these papers, we show where I believe this field is progressing. These are hot off the press papers. So 2 of them are accepted for publication in different journals, not yet published. So you can access currently the working paper version. I sincerely hope in a few weeks you will be able to access the final published open version of the articles. And then the third one is merely Respond deliverable, but it's also ready for being submitted to journal very soon. So really, I try to give a peek into what I think the state of the art is. I have a bunch of questions. I hope with this group, and I recognize quite many of you, so I hope we can have a sort of conversation. Please come with your critical comments, questions, concerns, or challenges, right? So let's be frank and open about these recent developments. What I'm going to present is recent research within Respond, but these papers have not been written in void. So many of them have been developed as part of a PhD in the Central European University or some other projects. So it's really a kind of snapshot of where Respond is, where the thinking in Respond is. So a brief overview, as I mentioned, and 3 main areas. One is using text, unstructured text information, various natural language processing methods. That's paper number 1. Paper number 2 is using network, social network analysis, contracting network, reformulation of public procurement data and what that means and what it can bring to the table. That's number 2. And then number 3, we have ownership, in particular beneficial ownership data linked to public procurement. And then I will try to bring a few things together and give you my 5 cents on where this field is heading. I have been, this has been my bread and butter, measuring corruption and working with various corruption risk indicators in public procurement for the last 10-15 years. So I might not see some recent trends. So I'm very happy again to hear what you think is missing or where this field is heading. So first of all, a brief overview, and those of you who have followed my work have seen this quite a few times. So I like to conceptualize a very basic, essential level public procurement as contracting transaction between a buyer on the left-hand side and the supplier on the right-hand side. This is sort of the formal part of the procurement transaction, which can or may not, or may be corrupted. And then in addition to this, there is a particularistic tie, which I often call political connection, but it's far more than that. And this is where the network aspect will come in. But some sort of informal, personalized relationship, which goes beyond the formal contract, which is enforceable at courts versus a personal particularistic tie, which is not. Now, why I like this framework, not because it tells anything new to people who understand public procurement a little bit. Why I like this framework is that it helps us structure the different red flags and the kinds of indicators we can develop. And these are the 4 groups where, to the best of my knowledge, all or nearly all indicators in this field fall. So the most populous group, if you like, is the one on the top, tendering risk indicators. So these are the mainly and typically the classic red flags. Single bidding, non-open procedures, very short advertisement, and so on and so forth. So you can think about all the indicators which relate to the process of contracting from planning to completion of the contract with, this is driven by data, with a heavy focus on the tendering process, far less on planning, sorry, it's the left-hand side, far less on contract implementation, not because we don't have ideas for these areas, it's because it's far harder to get data. Now, we have the supplier risk indicators. So these are risk indicators specific, inherent to suppliers, their owners they have, the financial performance they have, so on and so forth, where they are registered, tax haven registration. Then on the left-hand side, we have the buyers, the buyer risk indicators. This is the least developed of the 4. So this is where we have information on the internal structure of the buying entity. For example, whether the procurement function, the procurement officials are protected from political influence. And finally, we have the political connections, particularistic connections indicators, which have been predominantly a 0-1. Has this company had any owner or manager with a political office or a link to a political office holder or not, right? And that sort of has been dominating the literature. And this is something which is unfolding, growing, and we have different kinds of connections, different kinds of networks. Now, where I come in today is the 3 areas. I will show you one new thing in each of them. So I will start with the natural language processing, so trying to push the boundary on the tendering risk indicators part. Then I have number 2, the contracting networks, try to convince you that there is far more to connections than just this binary of political connections, PEP or not PEP. Even though that's valuable, I will just try to convince you there's more to that. And then thirdly, I have the linked company data playing around a bit with ownership information of companies. Mark that I have nothing on the left-hand side, the buyer risk indicators, and it's because it's far harder. And again, it's driven by data, not because we don't have ideas. So maybe some of you are working on indicators there, so I would be happy to learn about your work. So these 3 innovations, if you like, they build on the back of existing frameworks which by far, first and foremost, use structured data. Structured data on the level of contracts or tenders, sometimes items, sometimes payments, but typically contract/tender level. So this is the kind of thing, single bidding. So how many bidders have submitted a bid for tender A? Was it 1? Was it 2? Was it 15? What was the procedure type? Was it open? Was it invitation only? So on and so forth. So this is there. This is huge. This is probably which established this field. Some policy applications, some papers aggregate this information to companies, buyers, sometimes regions. So that's interesting. It's more variations on the same theme, but still remains in the domain of using structured data. So the data, the novel data, which enables the three papers which I'm bringing in today. A is looking at unstructured information, just text, descriptions, award criteria, eligibility criteria, so who can bid, who is allowed to bid, who is not allowed to bid. Then linked company data is taking the supplier, bringing it together with ownership, beneficial ownership information. And finally, using structured information, but building networks from it. So kind of rewiring how you use the data and checking whether this reveals new insight. Spoiler, yes, I think this is really gives us some very valuable, very useful insights. The methodological aspects which have been tried in this field, and where I think the most interesting innovations lie, by and large fall into three broad categories. The first, we could even call it first generation. So these have been expert assessment-based red flags. So no statistical testing, just asking experts who know their field, right? Auditors, investigators, journalists, and them academics. Well, I think we are also experts. So them defining red flags and then coding these red flags directly in the data. This ANAC, the Italian anti-corruption agency's red flag system is one. The European Commission now discontinued Arachne tool was like that. Now, these are great tools because they are driven or derived from cases where we know corruption has happened. Their weakness is that we don't know, and these tools typically don't explicitly test for, whether the red flags which are present in proven cases, whether they are also present in non-proven cases, right? We have salient cases which are characterized by X, Y, Z, say single bidding. But the question is whether single bidding has discriminant value, right? This is a scientific term, but intuitively it's very simple. Is it an indicator which helps us differentiate, discriminate between corrupt and non-corrupt cases? Just by looking at the corrupt cases, we don't know the answer to this question. And hence, the second type of red flags, which start from group number one, the expert recommended red flags, but validity test them statistically against theory, against the various benchmarks. And these are typically far shorter red flags list, but they are more reliable because the statistical methods help us to answer the question, are these red flags unique or more typical for proven cases than for other cases, non-proven cases, non-corrupt cases, or unknown cases, right? So some sort of statistical testing helps us to establish that red flag A is more often associated with corruption than with non-corruption, okay? So this is my work, and some of you might know the opentender.eu, EU-wide, so now it's a Europe-wide platform. Now, group number three, and I will mainly use these methods today, is applying some sort of machine learning framework where we have a target variable, say we have known cases of corruption, and we try to predict these cases. So we let the machines decide which red flags should be weighted higher, how the red flags should be parameterized. So are there thresholds above which risks increase, things like that. Now, the tricky thing with this is that we typically have proven cases and unknown cases, right? There's no country where every single contract or tender has been investigated. So we only know the cases which have been investigated and found to be corrupt. And a large, typically, 95, 98% of the data has an unknown status. The solution to this, the simple solution, cutting through the Gordian knot, it's wrong solution, but works, is naive positive negative learning. You just assume whichever case has not been investigated is non-corrupt. So clearly you make a mistake, but you hope that this is a relatively small mistake because you hope corruption is rare. Well, if you do this in Denmark, I'm with you. If you do it in other countries, well, maybe even the majority or a big part of uninvestigated unknown cases are also corrupt. So your machine learning framework is misspecified. A solution to this problem is what we call positive unlabeled learning. So this is a branch of machine learning where we have the positive cases, known positive cases of corruption, proven, nearly 100% precision, yet the other class is unknown. And then under certain assumptions, some portion of the unknowns are corrupt, some portion are non-corrupt, and then basically you develop a machine learning framework considering the structure of your data. And then the Lithuanian STT is one of the most advanced anti-corruption agencies in Europe, has recently developed such a tool. So now I would like to move on to the first paper after a quite long introduction, but I intend to stop at every block. So any questions so far of my short description of where we are, where innovations could be, and which methods I think are pushing the boundaries of knowledge? Any questions or comments at this stage? Okay, good. I'm sure you need to warm up a little bit. I will throw a lot of data and charts and numbers at you, so hopefully this will get better. Good. So this is a paper which is in a response deliverable to be submitted in 8 days. And then we hope that shortly after that, sometime in May, we will submit it to a journal. Yes, so this is together with Eszter Katona, who is an assistant professor at ELTE in Hungary. So what are the motivations behind this paper? So building on what I said already, there is a clear tendency of the literature to use red flags made out of structured data. Okay, that's the procedure type, call for tender advertisement, so on and so forth. Now, with this structured information, there are two features. One is that they are very visible, right? So procedure type is visible. Number of bidders is visible. Some are even monitored by anti-corruption agencies, which obviously make them unattractive for sophisticated corrupt groups, right? Because if something is monitored, something is visible, then it's not really good to do corruption through. So that was problem number one. Problem number two is that in a lot of situations, it's inconvenient or relatively hard to do corruption through these traditional red flags, right? If you have a lot of money to spend and you want to get it to your friends as a corrupt buyer, well, it's hard not to run an open tender. Once you run an open tender, it's hard not to advertise it, hard to do short advertisement periods, so on and so forth. So really, you need to bend the rules quite a bit, which is hard in quite a few countries. So you probably want something much more subtle. And if you know your field, or as a corrupt mayor or corrupt minister, you pay someone who knows this field, then you can actually do corruption in a sense, tailoring the tender, getting the contract to a favored company in a subtle way. And this is something which is inherent, hidden in the text, right? So in the text of the tenders, the call for tenders, typically the products which are bought, the description, the criteria which are used for this determining whether a company is allowed to bid or not, eligibility criteria, or the text of scoring bidders, okay? So the idea is that we have a big blind spot, and probably this is a blind spot in particular for sophisticated corrupt groups who expect to be monitored. And the idea would be that we can add these indicators, the text-based, unstructured text-based indicators, next to the red flags, right? So we kind of get a more comprehensive picture. So the goal of this paper is very straightforward. We want to identify those strategies, uncover them from the text, which are used for limiting competition for government contracts by tailoring the conditions to the favored company. And then there are two hypotheses, very straightforward, following from this question, underpinning this question. The first one is that these text-based limitations to competition, they are in addition to formalistic visible procurement process biases. Okay, so if for whatever reason the kind of big things, procedure type, advertisement period, so on and so forth, are not practical, say you have to spend a lot of money, want to build a highway, then these techniques come into play. Yeah? Hypothesis number one. Hypothesis number two is that actually there is a fairly complicated decision tree going on here, which is the different eligibility criteria, product descriptions, award criteria. They can be used in different combinations, if you like, additively, to create effective corruption strategies, effective from the perspective of the corrupt. Okay, so this is super interesting, right? So if you can tailor the eligibility criteria to the company who has connections to the buyer, then no need to manipulate the procedure type, no need to manipulate the award criteria, so on and so forth. But if the eligibility criteria was not tailored sufficiently, maybe you want to do something with the award criteria, right? So this is the idea of additivity, that wherever it's more practical, the corrupt will place these subtle competition restricting rules or terms into. Okay, so this is a paper using data from Hungary, 2012, 2020, 82,000 contracts. By and large, 2013 and 2020, we are having 8,000, 12,000 contracts. And this is coming from the official government gazette, which is on this közbeszerzés.hu website. The dependent variable, right? So how do we capture limitations to competition? Is a combination of two factors. One is single bidding on otherwise competitive markets, so 0, 1. One is when one bid submitted, 0 when two or more, on a market where we know that there are more companies, right? So this is very important. The kind of supplying a nuclear power plant fuel is excluded, right? It's a technologically monopolistic market. So this is dimension number one. Dimension number two is the spending share of the supplier. So what share of the buyer's annual spending is awarded to the same supplier in that year, right? If it's more than 50%, we talk about a dominant supplier potentially capturing the buyer. If it's less than 50%, we kind of think probably there was some healthy competition going on. So we combine these two zeros and ones. If at least one of them is a 1, we think it's some restriction or limitation on competition has been imposed. If it's 0, none of the conditions are met, then probably there was okay-ish competition. I'm not asking much. I mean, having two bidders with a supplier having 45% of local market share, it's still not like, stellar competitive performance, but sort of okay. What we have here is 57,000 records with contracts with 0, 25,000 with 1, so some limitation. So that 0 and 1 is what we try to explain. So what we have here in the model, we have the traditional red flags, short advertisement period, non-open procedure types, and control variables, the year, the contract value, the sector. And in addition to these structured fields, we have text-based indicators. We have meta characteristics and the specific words and terms and combinations of words in the text. The meta characteristics are relatively straightforward: length, use of numbers, the number of references to laws, lexical diversity, so convoluted language compared to the sectoral typical style. And then most importantly, we have text-based indicators. These are coming from the description, the word criteria, and eligibility criteria. And each of these texts are chunked into single words, combination of words, or so two words next to each other, or longer set of words following each other. We have various versions of this processing of the text. Some are just, as some of you know, NLP, bag of words. So you really just count the number of words irrespective of the order. We also have some more embedding-based vectorization. Sorry for this. So basically, embedding is when the word in the word and its immediate environment. So the company the word is keeping the other words. It frequently appears together with are the words which define the vector representing a word. So this is the kind of embeddings which gave rise to ChatGPT and friends, and a particular way of representing words as numbers, basically. So we have different ways of doing this, but you will see very quickly that even with very simple transformation of words, just looking at some particular sentences and combinations of words, you get very far. Good. So this is the baseline. You need to look at the last two columns, accuracy and F1 score. So these are metrics for how precisely the model predicts the 0 and 1. So what share, accuracy is basically the share of correctly classified zeros as well as ones. We have logistic regression, the baseline from the literature, pretty old, 10, 15 years old right by now. And then some machine learning models, random forest and boosting, which is also a tree-based method. So basically, if you look at random forest, which is the second last row from the bottom, we have about 0.7 accuracy rate, so 70% of the zeros and ones, so limited competition versus non-limited competition, are correctly predicted by this model. And by correctly predicting, I mean predictions on unseen data, right? So you use the part of the data to train the model, and you make predictions to the portion of the data, a random sample of the data, which was not used for training the model. So this is the baseline. If you like, this is reformulating previous results from the literature, structured data, CPV code, contract value, procedure type, stuff like this. Now, H1, structural constraints and red flags, plus text information. First, the three separately. And let's look at the red flags. So these are the green lines. And what is very important is that in all of the cases, when we add different types of text, the model accuracy increases. Okay, so we get from 70% accuracy to 79, 76, 78, right? So it varies a bit, but each time the model is now using more information. The model is using the particular sentences, the particular words in first description, then eligibility criteria, then award criteria, with description, product description being the most important, okay? So basically when particular words appear, sentences appear in the product description, then we have suddenly, quite big, it doesn't look dramatic maybe, but it is, right? From 70 to 79, a huge shift in prediction accuracy in these models. What does it tell us? It actually is supporting H1 that this text information gives us some very valuable information in terms of competition restriction, in addition to the structured information, red flags, and basic descriptors we know from the literature. If you pull everything together, so this is again the green one, random forest is performing the best. It is using the structural constraints, so CPV, product description, product code, contract value, things like that. Red flags, so procedure type, no CFD, things like that, plus all the text together. And this is very important, these F1 and accuracy scores, but mainly F1. So the overall performance of the model gets even better if you throw in all the information. And that is very interesting. So it looks like these bits of text, they capture additive different avenues to do competition restriction. Very good. Just to move on to some external validity testing. So once you train this model, this random forest model, you can test it against presence of politically connected firms or companies in Hungary. It's not looking super great, but that's because, and that's my opinion, that of course requires more research. Probably there are a lot of politically connected firms even among the zeros in our sample, yet we have some signal, and there we have even stronger signal that this text-based competition restriction scores or information, this also is positively associated with prices. So more of the restrictive terms, descriptions, and criteria, higher the prices. And this is exactly what you expect, right? So you have a market, right? So it's within CPV, you have a year, you have a contract value band, so kind of road construction of moderate size compared with another road construction of moderate size, but one will have these restrictive terms, one will not have, and prices increase by 3 percentage points on average. So that's, again, giving us some trust. But the fun part of text mining, of course, is that you don't need to rely on these tables and charts with numbers, but you can start reading this stuff. So we started to read the cases which are correctly classified by the text mining model, the NLP model, but incorrectly classified by the red flags. Okay, so the red flags say nothing to be worried about here. It's an open procedure. There's a call for tender published, long advertisement, everything by the book. Yet the text, when you start reading, when the model reads the description, the criteria suggest, there will be something deliberately a competition restricting in the text of the tender, right? So we try to kind of understand what's happening where the text reveals the correct information, that is, there was competition restriction, whereas the red flags were not, right? The red flags failed. And here is some of the main conclusions. For the eligibility criteria, the kind of things which come up is that convoluted, very long, very complex eligibility criteria look like there is competition restriction hidden there. Nothing surprising, but it's great that the model has found it. What is more interesting is the highly tailored criteria, which would be very hard to uncover just by reading this. But the model very nicely found these cases, and I really like this. I just pulled out one Hungarian example. So there is this CPV 33, some sort of healthcare stuff, angiographic equipment. I have no idea what that is. But the funny part is the bottom of the paragraph. So only those companies can bid which have delivered 119 of the first part of the product, 193 of the second part, and 28 of the 20. You see, it's extremely specific. And even though I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a healthcare specialist, it does look odd why you would require so specific numbers of types of or units of experience of that product, 19, 28, right? So if someone delivered 19 or 18 or 23, I really don't get it why I couldn't beat, right? So it really feels like, maybe not, but it feels like it was extremely specifically tailored to one company so that others cannot be, okay? So this is what's very nice, and the model picks it up. Reward criteria is mainly based on price and quantifiable metrics, but whenever we have this soft, non-quantifiable, non-objective information, like favorite quality of organizational plan, then again, we very likely get this restriction of competition. So this is what's, I think, very cool and is actionable for policy applications, investigations, but of course is something which is useful for us researchers because it gives an extra lens, an additional look at risks, even in cases, and I want to underline this again, even in cases where the formal characteristics are by the book. It's open, there was advertisement, there was long enough advertisement, so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm closing here the first paper. So I hope I could convince you that this approach adds on top of the traditional red flags based on structured information. This is a new aspect, a new dimension. to competition restriction, subtle, yet with machine learning we can capture these things. And we are working on as part of Falcon project, which our colleagues from Transcrime are also working on, but also as part of Respond, we are working on expanding this initial research from Hungary to countries like Spain, Bulgaria, France, and a number of others. And we hope that this is something which can, just be put on a dashboard, like single bidding can be put on a dashboard. And this is something which is in the making. And of course, the dream scenario is that we get the full tender documentation. And this might not have been clear for everyone. I was kind of shy and glossing over this. So we use tender, announcement information, the kind of short description. But the big thing is, of course, is the hundreds of pages of tender documentation, the full tender document, and also the full contract description, right? So this we didn't have access to. I know it's in some countries, like in Spain, like in the Czech Republic, partially in France, this can be obtained. It's hard work, but that's the next frontier in this, to not just get like a few paragraphs of text per tender, but pages and pages and pages. It will be much harder to process, but I'm pretty sure that the accuracy rates will go up from 79% to, who knows how far. Great. I will stop here. I promise I will throw a lot of charts and tables at you, but hopefully something interesting. So let me pause here for questions and comments. Questions can be clarifying questions. Questions can be critical or pointing at pushing me in future directions. I see Adina, your hand up. Please let me know.
And then Fernanda. Thank you so much, Mihály. I haven't had the pleasure to meet before, so nice to meet you. And I'm very interested in the use of NLP-based methodologies, because we've used them too, and we're just not quite sure how to report that in the methodology section. So I was paying close attention to how you did it. And obviously you can't really put much in the presentation. So I have some follow-up questions, if that's okay. And apologies, my attention tends to disperse in an online environment, so you may have mentioned it. So did you get the tender documents through web scraping, or how did you get them? I understand in Hungary you said they are not as available as in some other places. So was it through web scraping? Then who decided on those red flag eligibility or award criteria? Was it the research team that decided that before you applied the methodology, or was it an AI generated sort of findings that those are red flags, the eligibility and the award criteria? I'll stop here with the 2 questions enough for now. So give it to me and then we can continue.
Great questions. Thanks a lot, Adina. Fernanda, do you want to also ask a question and then I answer them in about?
Okay. Thank you. It was super cool. I have some technical questions actually. Caught my attention that random forest was the model that performed better. I was wondering if you have any explanation for that, and if you tested with Bayesian networks and neural networks, or for this type of analysis, they do not fit, they are not very common. Then you mentioned a lot about accuracy, but I was wondering if other metrics like precision and recall, you analyze them as well, or again, natural language processing is so specific that probably they are old metrics for other types of machine learning. And finally, have you thought about or reflected about any potential bias or unfairness that this analysis could generate based on the data you are training? Where would you see potential risks, even if it's not happening? Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot for these 2 sets of questions. Let me take them now, and then please, others, if you have questions or comments, happy to spend a bit more time on this paper. So first, indeed, the sources. So we have the announcement text, right? So you can think of this as an HTML page. TED, the Tenders Electronic Daily has this, a lot of national portals, and also the Hungarian portal has it. Most of it is structured information, the name of the buyer, city of the buyer, the ID of the supplier, contract value. But these standard announcements have small text fields, like the description of the product which is purchased, or a little table for the scoring criteria or reward criteria. So these are part of the HTML page. In some other cases, I've seen colleagues from open contracting partnerships. So sometimes this is part of a JSON data structure, but it's unstructured text, but very specific text, right? So I know that this is a description of the object, what is being bought, right? One paragraph or two. That's usually what's in the announcement text. What we don't have is the full tender documentation, right? So when you build a highway, an example, the announcement would have like a paragraph. I want to have a highway from city A to city B. We want to have like 3 bridges, 2 tunnels. This is the width, right? Some technical information, but relatively high level. And then the full tender documentation, which we didn't have, is like 100 pages long with what the engineers put together, right? So that's what I said, like, this is a dream scenario to start processing that data. But this is already, like, imagine 80,000 tenders, and then for each of them would have a few paragraphs worth of text, right? So it's already substantial text, but not, crazy, right? So this is about sources and where we got it. We scraped it off the web, right? So this is automatic data collection, pretty much. On what kind of textual information we use? We basically used everything which was there, and they fall into 3 broad groups. What you buy is the description, product description. Who can bid, the minimum conditions which need to be filled for bidders to be able to submit a valid bid. This is, I just said, eligibility criteria, but actually it has 3 subtypes, sorry. Financial, you need to have a company making this and this much money last year, so on and so forth. Technical, that was the example I read. You need to have delivered something similar, right? So building a hospital, it makes sense to require you that you have built a hospital in the past. And then some sort of skills/organizational resources. If you build a road, well, you need to have an engineer with this and this degree, with this and this specific number of years of experience. Okay, so eligibility criteria is like structured part of the call for tenders, and there are these 3 subparts. We just pull it together. That was the number 2. And number 3 is much more sparse, but very, very important. And this is the award criteria, scoring criteria, right? So usually it's just price, whoever is cheaper wins. But often there is price plus, right? Say price is 30%, and then you get 10 points for having someone with a PhD. You get 20 points for having a longer guarantee period. I'm making this up, but this is the kind of information which we have. Yeah.
So that information you have from that shortish description of the tender? Yeah?
Yeah, for the announcements,
okay. Thank
the
you.
tender announcements. Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. So, Fernanda, yes, so random forest came out on top, and this is often the case in quite many social sciences applications. And it's a little bit of a cheat. Random forest is, if you like, our go-to model because it doesn't require much tuning, right? So, for example, boosting requires more tuning. If you want to have some neural network, you need to. And some of these models take 3 days to run on a server. Yeah. So tuning means you rerun the same model, 50 times with different parameters you figure out. So we were limited in terms of how much tuning we could do. And this is exactly something we're still working on. But yes, random forest works better than logistic regression model. Works just a little bit better than boosting. We also tried support vector machines with RERS and not much neural networks, but it just takes longer. If you have like a deep learning model with 2, 3, 4, 5 hidden layers, I mean, it would just require far more computational resources. It might be that one of the reviewers will ask us to do it, and I wouldn't be against it. But for the moment, random forest does the trick, right? And then metrics. So we have precision, recall, F1 so and accuracy. So we have all four. I focus on accuracy because it's relatively balanced. So whichever model is best in accuracy tends to be the best in all the others. But indeed, in the paper, actually, we discuss them in a greater detail. Now, the biases. Yes, everything has biases. I don't know what kinds of biases this would exactly bring. But if, say, let me start the other way. So investigators and auditors use this information already. They read the text and they figure out whether it was tailored or not. Now, swapping it around and giving investigators a suggestion, hey, these rendering terms look like it was they were tailored, and then they read it, then I'm saying like, look, it has biases like any other recommendation system. It's based on some probabilities. Let's say it's in 80% of the cases is right, 20% wrong, but there is a human who reads them and looks at different bits of information, so I'm okay with some error. So that sort of error and bias is certainly there, but it's not different from other red flags. Yeah, so that's there. I don't know. I need to think more about biases. I'm sure there are systematic biases. Maybe you have something in your mind, and you can tell me. But if not, this is definitely something I will take with me to think about in the future.
No, we can talk. No, just to say that when you go to these anti-corruption agencies that are more advanced in using any type of AI, their drama is buying computers able to run the models because they want GPUs. Basically, it's the drama. But we can think together about potential bias, especially when we think about what type of data you're training, in the sense of if you are using companies that have been sanctioned before, for example, or the type of political connections who might change. But yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yes. Actually, now you made me realize that there is definitely one bias which we have tested and it's not looking too good, which is the models being specific to the e-procurement system of the period. So in Poland is one example where in the last 10 years they have 3 different publication structure, 3 different e-procurement system run by a ministry A, ministry B. So, all the mess which you can imagine. And basically the models train on the data from e-procurement system 1, making prediction to e-procurement system 2, they break down. Like you go from the 70-something% accuracy to 60 or 55. So basically each time there's a new e-procurement system, you need to retrain it. And this is different from single bidding, right? Because this is like a super simple indicator. But these are trying to pick up subtle things. And well, if you try to pick up subtle things, you need more consistent data. Otherwise, noise will take over. So this is definitely something. So in Poland, where we try to implement this, we have 3 models rather than 1. Plus, we have TED versus national, again, separate models. So it's 6 instead of 1. So it gets very complicated. And then, running this on a continuous basis, then with more models gets more complicated. Okay, shall I move on to paper 2 or any other comments and questions? Okay, I'm already worried that I will not have time for paper number 3, but the main thing is that we get through these in sufficient detail. Okay, paper number 2 is co-authored with Martí Medina Hernández and János Kertész, both from the Central European University. And this is based on data from Mexico. And this is using machine learning and network science to predict and detect fraud and corruption in a Mexican procurement. And this is now accepted for publication in scientific reports, which is very high quality natural sciences interdisciplinary journals, for those of you who don't know it. So the motivations for this paper is very different. The motivations are coming from the growing network science literature. So people coming from physics, complexity science, computational, social sciences, doing various bits and pieces of machine learning and other methods. I listed here a very good literature review from a few years ago in applied network science. And this is a fragmented literature. In particular, this is not too well in conversation with political science, public policy, the kind of folks like me doing red flags analysis. So the idea was that, hey, there are these interesting network aspects. Hey, there are these interesting machine learning approaches. Let's try to bring them together into a single integrated model, also bringing in red flags, what we call domain knowledge-based indicators, and let the machine figure out whether it is single bidding, which is more important, or say network centrality, which is more important to predict sanctioned suppliers. Okay, so kind of not like saying who is right and who should kind of throw away the papers they have written, but for one particular application, let's try to see how important different indicators are compared to each other. And it's context specific. Right? So federal procurement in Mexico is really not Denmark in all sorts of ways in terms of the data, in terms of the underlying political economy. So I wouldn't overgeneralize it. I would rather take this paper as an opportunity to do something very complex, very sophisticated, and deliver something which is interpretable and useful for policy. So the domain knowledge or red flags, if you like, they are coming from red flags on the tendering or contract level. So this was the single bidding, advertisement or submission period, procedure type, so on and so forth. We have aggregations. I mentioned to you that quite a few people in the literature use the contract level red flags and aggregate them to supplier or buyer level. So you can think like single bidding share, like just whether the contract was single bidding or not. You can have a couple of control variables like the period, the year, the supply type, so on and so forth. And then I'll spend a bit of time on explaining these colorful little charts. So network approaches have identified a series of different representations of procurement data as networks and derived indicators from these representations. So top left, bipartite network. Bipartite network is a terminus technicus of network science. It means it's a network where the two types of nodes, the rectangulars and the dots, the buyers and the suppliers, they're connected to each other, cross. Yeah, a buyer can contract a supplier, but suppliers don't contract each other, okay? Buyers don't contract each other. So we have two types of actors. They can contract with each other, they can be connected with each other, but not within their class, okay? That's why it's bipartite. So this is what we call a contracting network. So the relationships are contracts between organizations. So this is one key representation. From this representation, you can draw a giant network representing a full country, or you can zoom in, and now it's bottom left, contracting neighborhood. So you can see, you can characterize a buyer by the risk level of its suppliers, okay? So this is becoming interesting. You use red flags, but in a very different way. I'm not saying that a buyer is high risk or low risk, but I'm saying it tends to contract with high-risk suppliers. You see, it's a subtly different statement, but it definitely reveals something about that buyer. And then you can have a distribution of these risks. Is it homogeneous or not? Is this a buyer which always contracts with high-risk suppliers or has a bunch of high-risk and medium-risk suppliers, right? So sort of the distribution of its connections. Okay, so that's a neighborhood perspective. And finally, on the right-hand side, we have what we call a projection. A projection is when we move from the bipartite structure and we go to the unipartite structure. So we only have a network of suppliers or a network of buyers. How do we project a bipartite network? We project it by taking the other type of actors as the means of connecting actors. Okay, so two buyers are connected in the buyer projection if they share a supplier. Okay, so two buyers are linked not by a contract in this case, but a shared supplier. Okay, they awarded a contract to the very same supplier. These are two buyers. You can have the mirror image of that. Two suppliers are linked in the supplier projection if they share a buyer. They supplied the same buyer. Okay, so these two projections are interesting because a lot of traditional network metrics are much easier to calculate, much more readily calculated in these projections. And they also give you a different kind of lens at the contracting network. Okay, so I'm using structured data in a very different way. So what can you do with this data? You can calculate a bunch of standard network metrics. There are a few centrality measures. So you can look at what we call the degree centrality or eigenvector centrality or closeness centrality of vectors. So these are different ways of calculating, and I don't think I have the time to go into the details, but different ways of calculating whether an actor is in the core, a center of a network, or it's more in the periphery, far away from the others. Now, some of you might know the literature. It's a small literature, but I think it's very cool on linking corruption to state capture. And indeed, the network formulation of state capture is something which is very close to these metrics and very powerful, because now we don't just look at risks on a tender. Now we don't just look at the average risk of a buyer or supplier, but we look at their relationships and whether they consistently have a close relationship with each other, or maybe even high risk close relationship with each other. So clustering of actors, close relationship between them, and high risk or low risk, right? So you can start to combine red flags, risk factors with network position, global, like, for example, how close it is, an actor it is to all the other members, or some sort of more local degree centrality of the actor. So these are the very high level network metrics. There are a bunch of others in the paper and in the literature. Basically, you can throw in these metrics to see whether they predict proven cases in the Mexican case. Now, there is something which I mentioned before, and I would like to return to it. So the papers which use supervised machine learning in corruption research, they usually make a mistake or a simplification, if I want to put this differently, in that they take the proven positive cases, corrupt cases, as the ones you want to predict, but then take everything else as zeros, as non-corrupt. But this is not correct, right? Just because a contract or a supplier hasn't been investigated doesn't mean it's non-corrupt. So there is, and again, depends on the country, but there is a non-negligible share of contract suppliers, buyers, which are corrupt, but they haven't been uncovered because they haven't been investigated. Or they're very sophisticated, and in spite of the investigation, they haven't been found to be corrupt. Okay, so we have the proven cases which I can trust, more or less, but let's say we can trust, and a lot of unlabeled cases with unknown status. Okay, so this is what is a classic positive unlabeled learning setup. And in addition, this is an imbalanced positive unlabeled learning. So in the Mexican case, you can see the data in a second. We have a tiny a tiny share of contracts which are likely or found to be corrupt or fraudulent. Okay, so this is like 3%, 4%, 5%. Okay, so this is problem because those of you who know machine learning basically just throw in without any treatment of this imbalance. The model will just say, oh, all cases are non-corrupt. I'm 97% precise, right? Because the corruption is 3%, then if I claim everything is non-corrupt, then I'm 97% correct. Obviously, this is not relevant, not interesting for us because high accuracy, but basically useless model. Okay, so you have to do something with this imbalance. Then we have a particular tailored model, the Hellinger distance random forest, which is A, developed for positive unlabeled learning, B, can handle imbalanced samples by repeatedly sampling and using more balanced training sets, only the training. Okay, this is very important. Okay, so we have 2 million contracts in Mexico for 12 years, 1,673 sanctioned suppliers, sanctioned for different things, some for fake documentation, some for overcharging, some for submitting fake invoices, and some been sanctioned for breaching contractual terms, which we think is an euphemism for corruption, but of course might be that some of these irregularities are actually not related to corruption, so we might have a bit of a heterogeneity in the sanctioned cases. Yet, this is what we are trying to predict, and this is the kind of distribution of the likely fraudulent cases over the years. So I will not have time to go into the details of all of this. We are comparing 3 models. We have a more kind of early method in this positive unlabeled learning literature. And this is very new, right? So even this method is less than 10 years old. What we call positive unlabeled bagging, PU bagging. We have the Hellinger distance stratified random forest. This is the middle one. This is what performs best. And then we have basic ranking by the CRI. So red flags only, without sophisticated machine learning, without network metrics. Now, what is very important is that this method gives you a ranking of cases most likely to be fraudulent and least likely to be fraudulent. And we get this for all the 2 million contracts. And from both a scientific and investigative perspective, the interesting part is the highest ranked, top ranked contracts where the model says, look, it's very likely that it's fraudulent. And we only have positive cases. So basically, we can calculate the share of positive cases recovered by the model compared to a random recovery. So the random recovery would be 3% of that sort. And basically, compared to this 3% of randomly selected corrupt cases, we have a model which captures, 6 to 7 times more. So basically 20-something% at the upper end. Okay, so this model is substantially more precise in identifying fraudulent cases compared to random guessing. I'm not giving you, and that's referring back to Fernanda's earlier question, I'm not giving you an accuracy number. There's a reason to that, because we don't know how many cases of the unlabeled contracts are actually corrupt, right? So we would definitely have a bias there. And then I could have a vote here, like who thinks that only 3% of contracts are corrupt in Mexico? Who thinks this true number is far higher? I don't know, but my guess would be the true number is far higher. So the unlabeled probably hide a large but unknown number of corrupt cases. So that's why we can only focus on the recovery or recall of the proven positive cases. So this is kind of how the model works. It's sort of 7, 8 times better than random guessing in the part of the distribution which matters. And then we can start to think about what's under the hood, how network features perform compared to red flags and other structured information like product codes and year and contract value. And what is very important to record is that network features in the particular Mexican case, they actually contribute to prediction accuracy more than the traditional red flag. So it looks like knowing whom the supplier is contracting with, which position it has in the contracting network, where it is in its immediate neighborhood, is even more important than knowing whether the contract was a direct award, whether there was a call for tender published. So this is super interesting. The red flags, which I built my career on, are not useless, okay? So I want to reassure myself and reassure you. Some of you have done a lot of research on these red flags. So they are not useless, but they really look like only secondary importance in this particular Mexican case compared to the network position. And maybe this is not surprising because some of the red flags are very unreliable in the Mexican case, like the number of bidders is available only for, I think, less than 10% of the contract. So red flags are kind of not perfect for the Mexican case to start with, yet the network information is super important, okay? So supplier coreness, supplier eigenvector centrality. So these are metrics of either centrality or the local clustering of the nodes and edges. So these are super important in predicting the fraudulent contracts, the sanctioned suppliers. I'm a little worried that we are running out of time. So I will leave these interesting charts for another time, and I hope some of you will read the paper, which is a preprint is already available, and the final version will be published in a matter of a few weeks in Scientific Reports. And I will just conclude about the paper. So it is both feasible and fruitful to combine red flags with network information within one model. We have the methodological arsenal to apply these machine learning methods cognizant of the particular weaknesses and challenges of proven data for corruption in public procurement, and the network of suppliers and the network information is very important for understanding the supplier's risk. And red flags, by overall work well, they have some non-intuitive behaviors. So, for example, we have a lower sanctioning risk for the suppliers which only have direct awards, which is, at the first sight, it's counterintuitive. The second sight, it's not, because direct awards are far harder to audit than complex, well-documented open tenders. And this has been actually documented in Chile, in some other countries, that auditors more work with data-rich, well-documented cases like open tenders. So we have far more sanctions for these kind of procedures, suppliers in these procedures, than in simpler direct awards. So that's kind of refining our understanding of red flags, and whether red flags, which I think many of you would agree, direct awards are a red flag, yet they don't always predict sanctions, supplier sanctions, as we would expect them. So let me pause here. I again thrown lots of data and charts and methods and specific models at you. Happy to take questions, suggestions, or I can go back to some of the charts and walk you through if you wish. Any questions or comments? Okay, I'm afraid I lost some of you with too many charts and tables. I apologize. Um, Everything was clear? Okay. Um, Good. Unless someone wants to come in, let me quickly jump to the third paper, and I really just spent 5 minutes on this. I apologize for running over. This is co-authored paper with Irene Terrorista and Antonina Volkotrub. Irene is at the CEU, Antonina is ANTAC, an anti-corruption NGO in Ukraine. And this is a paper soon to appear in the European Journal of Criminal Policy and Research. And the motivations for this is to use beneficial ownership data for systematic risk assessment in public procurement. Okay, so beneficial ownership data has been used in real estate and some money laundering sort of research, far less often in public procurement. And we wanted to know if the supplier part of the my chart, if you remember about an hour ago, whether that can be enriched, and then the beneficial ownership information is something we can draw on to risk flag suppliers, and then by implication the contracts and tenders. So a few indicators which have been proposed by the wider literature, Riccardi and colleagues in Transcrime and some other people. So the few indicators which have been proposed and can be calculated across a large number of countries are on this slide. So we have company frequency by beneficial owner. So how many companies are owned by the same person? Okay, so the idea here is this number is very high, then it can be that this person is a nominee rather than a genuine owner. Of course, there are billionaires who really own 200 or 300 companies, but we would think that probably they are the exceptions to the rule, and then in most cases, excessive outlier number of companies linked to the same BO actually will signal deliberate hiding. Yeah. No beneficial ownership information or frequent change to this information. These are attempts at hiding in spite of a stringent transparency requirement. Looking at the age of the beneficial owner, very young or very old, so kind of outliers again would be risky. Then there are a couple of beneficial owner country, citizenship or residency kind of indicators. Foreigners are risky because validation is harder when someone shows, hey, here is my ID from country X, and there's no way to validate whether that's truly, genuinely an ID from that country. Then it is obviously a way to get around transparency requirements. So what we do is we pull data from public procurement registers and beneficial ownership registers, match them for 6 countries from Europe, that's EU, and outside of the EU, Ukraine and UK are now outside. Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, and Slovakia are relatively small countries, but taken together, they're substantial economies. Now, the data is by and large running to 2021, 2022 from mid-2010s, and then arguably this is data where most records come from the UK and Ukraine, but we do country-by-country analysis, so there will be no such bias. Okay, finishing up very quickly. So we try to combine the beneficial ownership features of the suppliers with the red flags, the corruption risk index in the particular contract, and tenders in the procurement data sets. The CRI stands for a simple composite, a simple average of single bidding, non-open procedure types, non-advertisement of the call for tenders, and a couple of other red flags. And what we expect is that their risks are frequent. So when there is a supplier which often contracts in the presence of these red flags, then the ownership features will be outlier, will be odd, will be unusual, indicating intention to hide, intention to circumvent the transparency requirements coming from these BO registers. So these are the results, country by country, indicator by indicator, and basically there are a couple of NAs, which are cells, so country indicator pairs, which couldn't calculate. There was not enough data, not enough variation. There are a couple of green cells. These are the ones we like, where the data behaves exactly as the theory would suggest. And there are a couple of no's, the red cells. These are the ones which we don't like, but these are the facts of empirical research where we hypothesized the relationship and we didn't find that relationship. Okay, so that's the sort of getting from a long list of promising bioindicators to context-specific validated set of indicators. So the most widely applicable indicator is company frequency by the BO. So how many companies are controlled by the same person, controlling the supplier. And here, invariably, the top 10%, the top is only 20%. So really the outliers are the ones where the CRI, the red flags are also spiking, right? So we have in the UK a particular individual, according to the filings, controlling 1,324 companies. In Ukraine, we have an individual, 495. For these outliers, we check them one by one. None of them is a famous billionaire. None of them is on Forbes list. They just have a lot of companies on their names. I don't know. Chances are some of these people are nominees or strawmen. How does this look in practice? So basically, our models identify a baseline. This is the UK example. Individuals having 1, 2, 3, 4 companies, then having some sort of intermediate category, and then there's a spike. So basically, more than 10 companies, then up until 1,324. This is the domain of higher risk, and we applied a sort of nonlinear approximation here. So we try to identify these step changes in the risk of the contracts as a function of the different deciles of these distributions, biodistributions. Time is running short, so I'm like jumping to conclusions. So one, I always say it for the last 10 years, and I want to say it again. Please don't jump to conclusions just because some indicators are promising based on cases. Indicator validation is key. In every single country, every single data set I have seen, there is always a far shorter list of valid and reliable corruption risk indicators than the long list of indicators we could calculate and we wanted to work or hoped to work based on cases. Okay, so that's really, there is this need for this validation from the long list. My second point, and it's more, not just to repeat myself over and over again, we have some future developments. I really see the literature developing towards, we really are getting into the domain of having risk indicators and models for a nearly complete spectrum of corruption strategies. One big blind spot is still the planning stage, the procurement plans, but you know, we are getting there, and this is very nice to have, because we have written on this with Liz David Barrett, but others as well. If you focus monitoring on one part of the procurement cycle, then likely what you get is displacement of corruption, right? So an effective anti-corruption and monitoring framework covers the full spectrum. We are getting models which are fit for purpose, tailored to the context. Models are getting probably less generalizable with a few exceptions, but we are getting more specific indicators and models. And finally, I would like to highlight, which is, I think, one of my biggest interests recently, is kind of looking at what's the difference between traditional red flags and very tailored risk models for proven cases. And it does look like, and I'm hoping that I will be able and we will be able to get there with Respond to figure out that some of the red flags are indicative of broader politically driven state capture kind of legal corruption, versus many of our machine learning models are far more specific to sanctionable behavior. And hence, some red flags will be useful for both purposes, political, systematic, legal corruption, as opposed to sanctionable criminal corruption. But some red flags will not, right? So other indicators will matter for different kinds of crime. So this is it. Lots of readings out there. I will share the slides with those of you who signed up. And I don't know how many of you managed to listen for so long. I didn't plan to talk this long, but I really enjoyed having the time to walk you through these many different papers. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your final questions and comments. Any questions or comments?
Mish, you mentioned the difference between the legal and the forms of influence. From what I've been seeing, sometimes we do need very clear rules saying this is yes or no, 0, 1, whatever you want to call it. Do you think with generative AI we would gain a bit of nuance and we would have things that could get us rid from the necessity of having norms and regulation to say this behavior is allowed or not? From simple, you cannot use public money to buy alcoholic beverage, to for more sophisticated things, or you still think we do need more regulation to allow machines to be more precise, accurate, or whatever you want to call them?
Yes, thanks a lot, Fernanda. This is, of course, a very difficult question. So I do think that we already have quite a few models, including the machine learning models or the traditional red flags models, which don't just say 0 and 1. They give you a score between 0 and 1, a continuous score. And then some are even normally distributed, saying like most records are in the middle of the distribution, and there are just few on the upper end where I would say look very likely corrupt. So I think we have that. So this kind of from green through yellow to red, if you follow my color coding. So I think this is needed. I'm fully with you. And this is there. Now, where you want regulation. So I think a lot of the behaviors with the traditional red flag, they are not outright illegal. They are bad practices, which we know often hide corruption, but not outright legal. And in many countries, including my home country, Hungary, a lot of the corruption has been systematic, right? So the regulatory framework has been set up in a way to make corruption easier, right? So in that sense, indicators which track proven cases, indicators which track the regulatory framework would miss the big story, right? Because a lot of corruption has been basically legalized, or by the letter of the law legal, but by the spirit of the law not at all, right? Because the spirit of the law is about competition, openness, fairness. Now these are, only followed by the letter, but not in spirit. So I think there are questions around that, but definitely I often get this thing like, shall we change the regulations to closer match the red flags? And I had this question like, should we ban single bidding because this is such a great indicator of corruption? I would be very careful with that. It's like, having a thermometer which says you are having high fever and just you take a pill to have lower fever, but the underlying infection is not going away, right? So treating the symptom as opposed to the underlying political economy, right? So I would be careful, but definitely this is something which is a conversation I have to follow. Agi, sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, I have, thanks, Mish. This was very interesting. And for me, I've learned a lot. I have a sort of a vague question. I'm not sure I could formulate it clearly, but I'll try, which is Is there a way to link these three papers together? Because I think what you've basically observed is how, well, corrupt actors become increasingly sophisticated, right? This is a game of cat and mouse or regulator and regulatee, to come back to Fernanda's question. So you need more sophisticated indicators and measurement techniques because corrupt actors respond to earlier measurement techniques, right? So they figured out that a single bidder contract or a single bidder procedure will raise attention. So they will opt for more sophisticated methods, such as including conditions that really only one bidder will in the end comply with. But is there a way we could sort of theoretically frame this as a series of adaptive measures on both sides, both on the side of the regulator and on the side of the corrupt actor, so that we really see this as a timeline or a sequence, right? This game of adaptation and counter-adaptation. So this is not so much about the method, but rather about the theory that underpins this mutual adaptation process. So as I said, it's not a very clear question, but it's sort of what I think is really fascinating theoretically from this series of papers.
I fully agree with you, Agi, and this is very important. And this is also a critical measurement because the literature's measurement problem, the literature started from very simple thing like single bidding rate. And Denmark looks very great on this. It has low single bidding rate. Poland and Hungary and Romania, they look bad. They have high single bidding rate. However, what you just said, and let me reformulate it, hopefully I got it right, is that corrupt groups invest into hiding or evasion of monitoring as a function of the severity, the credibility of being punished, right? So if I try to be corrupt in Denmark, I'm far more careful as opposed to trying to be corrupt in a country where, I just have friends in government and I know I will never be investigated, but unless my friends are out of office, which we'll see in some countries. But you get the point, right? So if my friends are protecting me, then I'm fine with single bidding, I mean, don't need to invest into sophisticated things. But in Denmark, probably it's not the case because law enforcement is strong. So I will invest as a corrupt group into more sophisticated actors. So kind of measuring countries on a simple metric, we underestimate the prevalence of corruption because we have proportionately more sophisticated corruption in the high integrity country, right? So my suspicion would be that we are underestimating corruption far more in Denmark than in Hungary. I don't know that, but exactly that's the kind of next step for this agenda. If I have different degrees of sophistication in the measurement, let's do the comparisons. Do I still see Denmark far less corrupt than, say, Romania on a sophisticated metric, or actually it flips? There's less sophisticated corruption in a more corrupt country versus more sophisticated corruption in a less corrupt country, right? So I think it's theoretically and empirically super interesting, and we are starting to get there. And I think a couple of things could be done to that end. Yes. Okay. I'm afraid time is up because I talked too long. Thank you for your patience. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope there were some useful insights in these papers and the summary of the field. And I think, Fernanda, we can share the PowerPoint, right, with those who signed up. So you will be able to read up on the details. As I said, these are in press, but preprint and earlier versions are already available, for example, on my research grade profile. So please do look at them and get in touch with me or the other members of the research team if you have questions or you want to follow up. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day.